Hey everyone, welcome to an all new episode of TV Dinners podcast. Tonight we are going to feed your entertainment soul with some new things that happened this week on TV and streaming, some things that have happened previously on TV and streaming, and some things that I would love to see on TV and streaming. So I feel like we have the ghost of Christmas present, Christmas past, and Christmas future all happening together at one time. It's going to be great. I promise that there will be no, there won't be actual, like, there won't be any real Christmas stuff happening here. It's just a really good metaphor that I like to use. Okay. Anyway, actually, I shouldn't even promise that because I can't promise that I won't bring Christmas into it. I feel like I bring Christmas into a lot of stuff. In any event, tonight I have my wonderful co-host partner in sort of everything and amazing and talented producer Josh. Josh, how are you tonight first of all?
I am super fantastic.
Awesome, very good. It does feel like Josh is in the Christmas spirit, so that's really good. I'm glad that you're bringing that energy to the show, Josh. A couple things that I wanted to just briefly touch on for this week. One, the amazing and talented Cindy Williams died. Um, Man, what a legacy. I don't know if everyone is familiar with Laverne and Shirley, which is where most people iconically know her from, but I sure did. And she also leaves behind a legacy of film work, which is pretty amazing, including a film with Francis Ford Coppola, and she was in American Graffiti. She's actually really very talented, and I know that she was beloved by both her family and her fans. So we will definitely miss Cindy Williams. Um, some other sort of interesting TV news. Apparently, Misha Green from Lovecraft Country, if you watched Lovecraft Country on HBO, which was really good. If you didn't see it, you should. Is getting ready to direct and write a film from Lionsgate called Sunflower. It's a thriller, so we wish her a lot of success with that. If her series Lovecraft Country is any indication of wider talent, I think we have something really amazing to look forward to. So I'm kind of excited about that. I know this isn't movie necessarily news, but I feel like the Warner Brothers tie with HBO Max kind of gives us a little bit of this in the purview for TV dinners. We did also hear that DC has wrapped up its slate of 10 movies and shows that it will use to sort of kick off the new and improved extra white and bright DC universe. I don't know how I feel about some of these. Um, I trust James Gunn, but I don't know. So I am definitely gonna ask Josh. First of all, Josh, do you know about the new DC lineup? And if you do, what did you think about it?
I did check it out. I don't really recall what it was, to be honest. I know Superman Legacy is a part of it.
Superman Legacy. We've got Lanterns, the TV series.
Hmm.
We've got The Authority. That's the movie that's going to be based on DC's Wildstorm. We've got Paradise Lost, which will be the Wonder Woman. It'll be a Wonder Woman series. We've got The Brave and the Bold. That's going to be Batman's Family.
Yeah, that's I think I read it was Batman and Robin, Damian Robin.
Ooh, so that can be interesting. We have something called Booster Gold, which is I don't.
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't really
Yes.
know a ton of this. I know what I know about it is the tagline that is it's imposter syndrome as a superhero.
Yeah. Yeah. Booster
Okay,
Gold
well that
is an amazingly hilarious character.
so that could be good. I heard somebody compare this to to the boys, as in, like, it's going to be like satirical. It'll be fun, but it'll be very satirical.
Hmm.
Fun. I hear we've got a Supergirl movie that is coming out. That'll be interesting. Um, Apparently, it's not going to be a continuation of the Supergirl TV series, though, which means that possibly everything that was in the Supergirl TV series may not be canon anymore. Um,
Oh,
I,
that the Arrowverse is dead.
I believe so. Yes. Swamp Thing as a movie. Listen, guys, I love you. But I don't know why you keep trying to resurrect Swamp Thing. I don't know if the interest is there. I feel like we keep trying, but I don't know. We're not using the right regrowth serum, maybe. I'm not really sure what's happening there, but who knows? Maybe it could be good. We'll have to wait and see. That's what I have for right now in terms of the DC slate. I feel like it's starting off pretty good with everything except Swamp Thing. It's starting off pretty good. There's a lot of TV that sounds like it could be good in there. Um, One interesting thing, uh, which I neglected to say, which I feel like I am remiss in being not saying it. Waller is going to be a TV series. So, not necessarily a spin-off of Peacemaker, but definitely in there because we know we're already getting a Peacemaker season 2. So, sort of in there is this TV series about Amanda Waller. That could be interesting. What do you think about that one?
Of all the characters that we've seen throughout the different films, that is one that probably does deserve a little bit of a deeper dive. And I'm wondering if it's going to be a kind of a backstory or if it's still just, we're moving forward in a timeline that, well, we don't know how any of this fits together with what's already come out.
Yeah, and what I understand is that they are delaying Peacemaker season 2. But the series will fall between the first and the second season of Peacemaker. So at the moment, apparently, he's very busy writing Creature Commandos, and Superman. So Peacemaker season 2 isn't going to come out right away, but when when the Waller series does come out, it will fit squarely between Peacemaker 1 and Peacemaker 2, which could be pretty interesting because it does feel like a lot happened at the end of the season Peacemaker, the first season,
Hmm.
and whatever is going to ramp up for season 2 is probably going to be as off the walls. I very much look at Peacemaker the series uh like I look at Doom Patrol, although not as obviously it's not as huge. But I look at the sort of irreverence of it is what it makes it good, and then all of the associations that get made along with it feel just as good because the core is so irreverent. I hope that that works. I feel like it could work really well. Creature Commandos as a TV series is an animated TV series. Um, I I mean, I don't know a ton of this. I know that one of the characters that's going to be in it is Weasel from Suicide Squad. That could be interesting. I know everybody wanted to see more Weasel, so yeah, there we go. I just don't know a ton about this at all. Uh, I know that James Gunn he wrote all the episodes, but that's about all I know. So, okay, well, of all of those, what are you the most excited about?
What am I the most excited about? Gosh, out of everything on the docket, you're asking me what I'm most excited about.
Well, I mean, there's only 10, so of the 10, what is your top? What would be your top pick?
The only reason I'm hemming and hawing here is because there are a lot of really interesting options to be perfectly honest. Because I said at the top, Superman Legacy. That's going to be an interesting story, especially since what has come before it has been, you know what? I will be generous and say it was only lackluster.
Mm,
But at the same time, seeing and when I read about this earlier, this is the exact thought I had when it comes to Batman. Right, we have seen the early part of Batman on film many times, and it was interesting with the Batfleck version of Batman, seeing a more grizzled and aged Batman. Sure, finally, it's something new at least, but there are decades upon decades worth of material to pull from, and it seems like there's only a certain handful of things we ever get to see on film. So the
true.
fact that we get to move forward with a Batman that has a Robin that isn't, Dick Grayson is, I mean, to me, that's pretty cool. We're finally starting from a different point,
Mm,
starting with differences than what we've seen so far. Unlike, what was it, Schumacher's Robin, where, to be honest, it made no sense for the the billionaire to, you know, uh, take over custody
yeah,
of a 30-year-old man.
agreed. Agreed.
Kind of weird. Kind of weird. Just saying. Like, if this guy's like, I'm gonna ride on my motorcycle and get out of here. You're not my dad. It's like, yeah, don't forget to like go pay your taxes and clock in at the factory, whatever it is you do, because you're an adult.
Yeah,
So yeah, I just hope they cast a kid.
that's what it looks like. I mean, I don't know for sure, but that's what it looks like. Uh, I personally am the most excited about um, the Wonder Woman because although Wonder Woman isn't going to be a part of this, it's supposed to take place before Diana was even born.
Hmm.
Um, it also is supposed to apparently be written with the kind of intrigue and Game of Thrones style um, political machinations that sort of make that kind of origin story really good. And I mean, let's face it, an island that is made up of just women must have an incredible story to tell, not just because they're just women, but because there's got to be so much going on behind the scenes. Why? Why did all of these things happen? And not just why did they happen, but what how does the power structure really work? Like there's some really interesting ideas I think behind this, and we get sort of a little glimpse of it in Wonder Woman, but not enough. So feel like it could be really good. Um, I hope that they bring on some female writers for this, though. I That's all I can say. I won't, hope too much, but I kind of hope that that is what they do. Let's see. What in terms of this week, it feels like it has been a little bit of a light week in TV content. I will say that I have started to watch the Mayfair Witches. I don't know if anybody else is watching that. It's filling a spot that I had sort of open because Interview with the Vampire is over and until next season. Um, and Mayfair Witches hit such a different note. It is not Lestat and Louis being, quibbly back and forth. Mayfair Witches is really about power structures and very deep and hidden societies that are acting sort of in the present day and, kind of like a broad daylight sort of feel, but always behind the scenes, always, you know, sort of deals happening that are hidden from everyone else, that if you're not supernatural you wouldn't know about them or even be able to see them in some cases. I really like it. It's a little hard to get into. Like, if you haven't read Anne Rice, I can see why people would be a little bit weirded out by what's happening. If you have read Anne Rice, it's definitely worth it because they're doing some really good adaptation work here. But even if you haven't, give it a chance. It starts to ramp up, I think, after episode 2, where you really start to get into the meat of what is happening here, and why the house and the relationships are so important between all of these women. It's actually kind of cool. I like it a lot. Telemuska is actually a really one of the most and coolest ideas that Anne Rice came up with. Telemuska. I really love it. What else is sort of happening in the world of TV? I mean, there's the standard stuff. There's the Picard came out with a new trailer. That's exciting. We heard a little bit of Star Trek news also from the Strange New World, which is going to be an interesting, I think, season shaping up. But, not a ton of new stuff that's been coming out. Mostly it's just all anticipated stuff. I think that the biggest and most important TV series news, if you will, because it's not really news, but let's just call it buzz, was Sunday night's episode of The Last of Us. And I was just talking to Josh prior to our podcast, and we sort of finalized a idea for a podcast to talk about The Last of Us in depth. But for this podcast, I did want to kind of brush on this a bit because I think, just in terms of what's happening TV wise, this is a big one. Um, so one of the things that happened in the series as it is kind of going along is we're learning more and more about what Joel's life and Tess's life was before the apocalypse, and then sort of by extension what life was like before the apocalypse, and then what life was like during the apocalypse, that is a little bit different than the view that we see from just Tess and Joel. It's really interesting. Um, so this episode dealt with these. It dealt with survival. It dealt with a lot of themes that I think were interesting to say the least, and that all sort of culminated in the end with a kind of fresh but also retrospective glimpse at what The Last of Us is really all about. It was obviously very well done. I mean, there's a lot of just absolute critical accolades for this particular episode. So much so that some people, are calling it award bait and things like that, which, okay, whatever. But I'm happy to sort of hear that in some ways because it means that it's really getting a lot of attention. And this particular episode did really deserve it. So I'm going to ask Josh, I'm going to ask you for your opinion on the episode, but specifically, I would really like to know how you felt as someone who's played the game, or games, I should say, not the game. What you thought of how they recrafted Bill's story, and did it work?
I started talking and realized I was on mute.
I
That's
had a
that's how it always
feeling.
works.
Awkward pauses usually mean you're on mute. Yes.
Well, you know how it is when you have a house with kids. The background can be a bit cray cray sometimes. So, but anyway, okay. But what did I think about the episode? I thought it was good. I thought it was great. That's what I thought about the episode. And how do I feel about the changes that were made? I thought going into this that it was an interesting choice to devote so much time to telling the story to begin with, and in the grand scheme of the things with the overarching narrative, some might say, what does it have to do with Joel and Ellie? Well, of course, what people often fail to remember is world building is essential to telling great stories. I've talked about this countless times, and the changing the we'll say the ending of this particular subplot, I thought it actually helped tell a more poignant story than, if they just kind of kept it the same,
Right.
especially since we were able to see uh, just brilliant performances by these two guys. And one, uh, I had no idea Nick Offerman had this kind of, huxpah, you know,
Yeah, yeah. It's an amazing range, if you ask me. I mean, yeah, I never would have guessed it either.
to go from so strong and, you know, they're all Nazis to, you know, and I don't even mean that in kind of, you know, any kind of downplaying way. It was insanely amazing how, the extremes he went, and everything in between in this episode with these performances. And if things just kind of played out the same way they did in the game, I don't think it would have held the weight that this story told.
Well, so one thing that I think is often missed in especially serial storytelling that has adaptations of, a big story. And The Last of Us is a big story. The game itself has primary missions and a very clear objective. But what happens along the way is pretty muddy, and there's muddy in a good way. But lots of things happen, and I think you're right in the sense that world building needs to be a thing, especially for people who haven't played the game. And it's not. There's nothing wrong, I don't think, with expressing just how dramatic the world can be, what it sort of has become, and how it has both evolved and devolved. But the core of this, which I feel like is so many people, maybe not that they missed it, but that they skipped over it, is that essentially humanity goes on. That is, there is a need to connect with other humans. There is a It's not just a bond, but there is a quintessential thirst for being connected with other people that drives people to do things. And that's what I feel like we saw. There is a want and a desire to maintain some kind of normalcy, but it's born out so much further than that into this idea that comfort is a thing, that where you can't find comfort you can make comfort, where you can give hope and love, you give hope and love. And this is all stuff that, as we go through the series, Joel clearly is completely cut off from that right now. I mean, look at what his response was to Ellie when Ellie brought up Tess. He said, "Look, we've got to get a couple of things straight, and one of them is you don't talk about Tess. Why? Not because, I mean, clearly why. Why? Because he's just still too devastated by her death." And this is, I think, where really good narrative storytelling can make all the difference, and that is show us. in a vignette, show us in a short take of characters what this really means. What is it that they are embarking on? The other thing which I feel like is so important here is that there's another aspect to telling the story in this way, and that is we don't know right now what's in store for Ellie and Joel. We don't know how terrible things might become. And so we get just sort of a small glimpse of people being people in a post apocalyptic world, which is quite a bit different if I compare it to like The Walking Dead or Resident Evil or whatever, because we're dealing with the up close and personal aspects of being in a relationship, but I feel like it's more than just a relationship. I feel like it's that found family feeling that is so important and just raises everything to the next level. The stakes get so much higher because you feel like the people who you are connected with are your family. And that I think is like one of the Last of Us biggest points. It's one of the biggest narrative points that family doesn't have to be just who you are born with. Family can be the people that you, by extension, really care about. Um, yeah, I did. As far as we know, Bill is still alive in the games, I think. And but I did really like the way that Joel got the truck through, all of all of the things that happen so that when they arrive, Bill basically isn't there, and it just made things, I feel like, move along nicely. I can't find a single fault with this week's episode except maybe I wish it would have lasted longer. I mean, there was just something so compelling about it. Just little tiny bit of news. Before I came on the air, I had this thing that came across my desk that said, according to Spotify, Linda Ronstadt's Long, Long Time, the requests for that song have increased by, what did I say? Like 4,000%. I mean, it was an insane amount. It was just a huge, huge amount. That I feel like that is one of those things that's like, kind of like in Stranger Things, running up that hill, stayed on top of a Spotify chart forever and a day because that's how impactful it was. This also has that same impact. No one will hear this song and not feel like, oh yeah, you know what? Um, wh- this is exactly where the entire episode boils down. It boils down to this. Um, I'm going to transition into without much of a segue here, but I'm going to transition into what my deep dive for the day is going to be. And I have to say that I considered actually doing a deeper dive into what was happening with The Last of Us because I felt like it was so important, but we're going to reserve that for, like I said, a specialized podcast. And I want to talk about a show that to me is sort of like, I don't want to call it a precursor because it's not really a precursor, but along a congruous line, we're seeing a lot of shows that deal with a sense of diversity. And maybe more than diversity, I feel like we're dealing with shows now that have a better matrix for talking about societal issues that we want to hash out, that the world is sort of talking about continually. And it can be anything from misogyny to racism to um, commentaries on social media, all kinds of things. And when I first started watching the Orville on Hulu. I started on Hulu. I was impressed, and it is I mean, it's a really impressive show. No matter how you slice it up, it's an impressive show. I don't, and never really have, liked Seth MacFarlane until I started watching The Orville. And it completely changed my mind about both Seth MacFarlane as the artist and Seth MacFarlane just sort of in terms of the conceptual ideas that were going on here. The Orville is kind of like a love letter to Star Trek. I think anybody who's ever seen it would agree with that aspect. But it goes so much further than being a love letter to Star Trek, because where Star Trek says, this is what we're going to tackle episode by episode and deal with sort of in a less than 60-minute crunch, the Orville takes its time and unravels everything from misogyny to transgender issues to racism to social media and many other points along the way. Now, the culmination, and I won't spoil everything that happens in season 3 in case you haven't seen it. I know it aired last summer, but just in case. Season 3 of The Orville was, I think, just a masterclass in both expressing this sense of diversity, but also recognizing that diversity is not easy, that it is hard work, that you're never going to please everyone. And even when you do please many people, there will always be sour grapes. There will always be people that see it completely differently. Not just, oh, hey, I don't agree with this, but I fundamentally don't understand why you can see that this is the way it is. But I also feel like the Orville deals in large part with hope that we can progressively move into a different field of understanding where even if we don't agree with each other, we can still get along with each other. And that to me was maybe one of the best parts of the show. You don't have to agree with everything in order to get along, and at the very least acknowledge that, hey, this is a thing, now how are we going to deal with it? Of course, there's always the sort of, on its fulcrum is this idea between peace and war, violence and nonviolence, and that is sort of always an overarching theme. And I don't necessarily know if that is always the best. Like, I always feel like in these episodic serials that take place in space, there always has to be the quote unquote bad guy. And sometimes, and I will say that the Orville does a really good job of making sure that we understand that the quote unquote bad guy is sometimes they come from within. So, we are the monsters is sort of a theme, but it kind of skews things in the sense that like it creates winners and losers, and I don't know if I feel like that was essentially a really good use of their time, because the rest of the show dealt so effectively with themes that as they began to get more and more into them made so much sense. So much sense in the sense that, as society and civilization advance, here are some things that we will continue to grapple with, and here's how we will grapple with them. I think one of the only things about the Orville that kind of gets on my nerves, in the same way that Star Trek used to too, is I'm all for sort of appreciating classical music, right? That's always a thing. Picard loves his classical music. Um, there's always something that's good in there, but there is an overemphasis in the Orville on 20 and 21st century Earth, which I get. I mean, that's where we are. So, of course, that's where we're going to pull our important features from. But I don't know about you. To me, sometimes that's a little bit lack of imagination. Like, what are some other things that we might be really struggling with in the centuries to come as we go out there in space and are actually experiencing other things? What are some other sort of experiences that might give us pause? Those things are sort of, I think, to me, they're very important. And like I said, not always the best use of time in the sense that, yeah, okay, fine. Are we always going to be talking about, who wants to war with who's? I don't know. Sometimes it just feels like, this is the only way that we get to tell a story is through the scope of war, and it just is kind of bothersome. um One of the other big functions that I think the Orville fits into is this idea that narrative storytelling can sometimes be effectively told over multiple characters' perspectives without taking or diminishing any of the roles that are from the primary characters. So the primary characters here are Commander Grayson, um, and and of course Ed, who's the captain, and the crew of the bridge, right? Those are sort of the primary characters, but they're primary in the sense that they all sort of trade off and kind of have their own moment in the spotlight or moments in the spotlight. And I love that because it gives us a multi pronged look at what goes into this sort of community in space. One of the biggest surprises for me from the Orville is the fact that they didn't shy away from exposing basically our own short-sightedness, and they really called it out. Like, it's really short-sighted to be so misogynistic. It's really short-sighted to not take into consideration the will of people in terms of what their identity is. That it's incredibly short-sighted and possibly difficult to navigate a system where everything is sort of in one bubble when you know that there's a bigger bubble outside of it. So how do you interact with those people? I did really like that. There's an episode where one of the planets that they go to operates in a, I mean, they call it a true democracy. It's not really exactly that. I guess fundamentally it kind of is, where basically like you vote on everything. And the will of the people can be extremely harsh, even if you're just dancing with a statue and people think that that's disrespectful. And they pulled in this sort of almost sublime idea of what social media kind of looks like, and how up votes mean, this is good, and down votes mean, no, this is bad. So much so that it even created a race, or a class, I should say, of people who could get services and who couldn't get services based on the number of upvotes or downvotes that they have. That was very interesting. And I think themes like that made the show as powerful as it felt. But then there were also episodes where I felt like they kind of stumbled a little bit by saying, okay, well, we have to be as broadly to we have to be as broadly inclusive as possible in order to make sure that everybody understands what we're saying. And so in some places they sort of missed the nuance of different topics. And the one that really comes to mind is the whole idea of the transgender kid, who is from the species the Mocklins, and sort of what happens there, which I won't get into in case you haven't seen it. But there's a lot of subtle nuance in the conversations that could have been had that weren't had. And that to me felt like a missed opportunity, because I do think there were plenty of moments for just sort of like clunky dialogue around it. Um But overall, hats off to everyone who was writing over at the Orville for even taking a chance on that. I don't think I've seen very many shows at all that have been willing to sort of tackle that in a way that not just makes sense, but also doesn't hit you over the head with it in a way that, says, "Hey, this is just wrong," or, "This is this is dumb the way that this is happening." They make the characters sound like that. But clearly the show has a much better understanding of the subject matter that they're trying to convey. One last sort of shout out for the Orville, and that is this idea, which I think we are actually headed for. I know it doesn't seem like it today, but I feel like in the next maybe couple decades, um, we're going to start grappling with the idea that AI has personality and what that means. Is AI sentient? Is AI not sentient? Do we have some kind of leveraged idea about how we're going to integrate AI into society? And I know this sounds like, maybe an old idea, and certainly great science fiction writers of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s have written about this and really given us some pretty deep material to chew into. But I think we're about to live it. And living something and just talking about it are two very different things. And I think, we can point to George Orwell, who really wrote a lot of the things that we see happening today. And we thought, oh, that's so crazy dystopian, that will never happen. But we're seeing it. And we're not really grappling with it all that well. We're not doing the kind of work that I think we need to do as a society. And so it's interesting to watch the Orville show us these glimpses of the future where clearly AI has become something a little bit more than what we even understand it to be today. Um, I don't think that it's given us any, the Orville didn't give us any conclusions about that, or, any, hey, this is morally right or this is morally wrong. There are definitely things that happen which I feel like are surprising. Um, but that is another one of those things that I really am hoping that they get another season so that they can truly work some of that into their plots, into their narrative, because they've already set the stage so well for AI to be a very broad theme. There's an entire race of beings that are, I mean, I don't know if I want to say that they are like sentient AI, but that's basically what they are. And how we're going to deal with that, I think, is a wide open question, and one of the reasons that I love shows like this. Just sort of as a closing note on the Orville. First, I'll say that I didn't think I was going to like it. I thought it was going to be, okay, another silly space movie, another, or space show, another, how are they going to rip off this idea or that idea? Surprisingly, the Orville breaks new ground, does things with tropes that sort of turn them on their head, including things like a computer virus. Just really makes an excellent, excellent show for sort of subverting some of the tropes that we have, or changing them up significantly so that we can still recognize what they are while making them interesting. um I fell in love, I think, with this show the moment that I realized that it was really kind of an in your face sort of, hey, season one felt a little bit rough. It felt a little bit, like, okay, yeah, this was definitely a season one. By season two, not only did I love the characters, but I wanted resolution to some of their storylines, or I just wanted to see the storylines go on. I felt connected on so many levels to them, including things that I didn't think I would be really into. Like, well, what about the romantic entanglement between the captain and the first officer? W- It just, to me, that felt almost kind of sophomoric in the beginning. But by the end, it was like, oh, wait a minute, this is a real thing. Like, this is important. And it really felt important, and that can only come from the writing. That had nothing to do with just, me deciding that what I had thought in the beginning wasn't true. I don't think that that was. I think they wrote it to soften the edges, to make it more important, to give it this like fully fleshed out feeling. And for that, really do give them a lot of credit. I highly suggest that if you haven't seen the Orville, that you watch it, and get a feel. There's only 3 seasons right now, but they're good 3 seasons. I mean, really good. Like, excellent. They feel so developed. Each individual um episode feels like it is a really fully developed episode. I just can't speak highly enough about it. This coming week, I am really interested to see some new things that I haven't ventured into because I've been so busy with other things. So I really want to go back and revisit some shows that I watched in 2022, sort of in a rush. And I really want to go back and watch them again with a more critical eye. One of them is, well, I guess it wasn't 2022, it was really 2021, but Wheel of Time is one of those shows that I really want to go back and look at. I have heard that they have delayed the release date for Wheel of Time because they had, not the greatest start for Wheel of Time with its kind of rushed CG and kind of rushed storytelling. And I mean, in large part, that was because of COVID. So, I'm not writing them any excuse checks here, but I do think that there were some legitimate sort of concerns that people had about the show, which I do feel like they're taking seriously and readdressing. So that's good. Um, I also really want to go back and rewatch Rings of Power. I know this is incredibly divisive, and either you're like on the side of no, everything about Rings of Power is terrible, or the other side, which is yeah, this is good. I really like it. There's something interesting to be told here. I think that this is a good Tolkien experience. I just don't know anybody who kind of sits in the middle of this debate, but I really want to go back and look at that again and decide for myself where I kind of am in terms of, does this really rise to the level of what I think Tolkien material is, or does it, maybe need a little bit of a polish, and where could those polish pieces be? Um, I think the other sort of small thing that I really wanted to do this week, which I hope I will get a chance to do, is really go back and look once more at the 2 episodes that came before the Last of Us episode season 3, or I'm sorry, the Last of Us season 1 episode 3. Um, so I've seen a lot of breakdown for the Last of Us, and some of it makes a lot of sense, and some of it feels a little nitpicky. And I really want to go back and sort of take a look and see why some of that feels so nitpicky, and then also get a bit. I feel like I was so overwhelmed by episode 1 and episode 2, and I had so much excitement for the show itself that I took off my critical hat and was just reacting as a fan. Just reacting. I mean, like, I can't even remember a specific camera angle that, really kind of made me feel like, oh, look at what they did here. Or enjoyed a lighting scene or a sequence, except for maybe when they were in the museum. Those kinds of things, which I normally revel in. So I'm kind of excited to go back and re-look at those things, and hopefully that will also give me some fresh perspective on our new podcast, which will be TV Dinners, The Last of Us. I'm actually really excited about that. And Josh, my awesome producer and co host, will be joining me for that one as well. I hope that this week you find something awesome to watch on TV. Netflix is coming out with a ton of new shows this week. Some of them are foreign, they're all really good though. HBO Max doesn't have a ton that's new this week. There are going to be some new episodes coming soon, obviously for The Last of Us. There's going to be some new material that'll be coming out on some of the Hulu shows, which I just heard re-signed the big merger with Fox, so that will continue on. All of your favorite Fox shows will end up on Hulu again, either a day late or just slightly delayed. So that's kind of good news. I'm actually pretty excited about that. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you so much for joining me on our podcast tonight. I really look forward to hopefully seeing you on our podcast for The Last of Us and for our podcast tomorrow, where we will be counting down top 10 movies of films that are where all of the characters are on vacation, or the characters are on vacation, vacation themed movies. I'm really excited about this one. I have a list that is so incredibly eclectic this week. It has comedy, it has some romance, it has some high adventure, it has some really dorky stuff, animation. I mean, there is something for everyone on this list. And I know that Josh also will bring his A game and deliver the most excellent movies we always do. And that's tomorrow, same time, 8:30 Eastern. And that's the 10 to 1 podcast. You can find me over at moviesandmeals.com, and you can find all things TV Dinners and 10 to 1 over at Wadcast Media. I had a great time tonight. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you next week.